dedicated to the high holidays, to the topics of divine judgment, which Yom Kippur is all about. And we did cover lots of ground. First of all, we talked about the ultimate hope, which will save us from evil, which is the hope of resurrection. And how much better the concept of bodily resurrection is compared to the idea that only one part of your soul is going to enjoy eternity in paradise. The bodily resurrection seems to be more logical because God created us with body. If we're not some kind of Stoic philosophers who teach that flesh is only carnal and evil. We can enjoy our bodies, we can enjoy a nice food, we can enjoy other things, and God doesn't mind it. And this is why He wants to bring us to eternity wholesome, in body, spirit, and soul all together, put back together at the glorious day of His resurrection. But today, I'm going to switch the topic to some negative. And the topic is, where the hell is? That's how I called the topic. If you really have a good eyes, a picture is really nice. Those who will watch us on YouTube will see it more clearly. But the writing here in the picture says, what happens to a soul when they reject Jesus Christ as God Almighty? Okay, so let's talk about that. What happens to a soul when they reject Jesus Christ as Lord God Almighty? Well, we do have a serious warning. The warning comes from the story of sheep and goats found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25. And we talked about this parable we mentioned it several times. We mentioned it in the context of when does the retribution come? It comes when the Son of Man descends from the clouds of heaven. And then He divides people. Those who are on the right, the sheep, are going to inherit the kingdom. Those who are on the left, the goat, it is to them the words are, depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. Well, however, unfortunately, this type of threat was quite abused over the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, what the church in the Middle Ages did, it scared hell of people. That's what they were doing. People were motivated to do anything just because they were hell scared. Guess what? the Great Revival of America came. Dwight Moody, a famous Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I studied there for 1 month. Yeah, it's Matthew 25:41. Thank you. Dwight Moody was a great fire and brimstone preacher. He called people to repentance using the force of fear. And I think the early 20th century, it was working. But in the postmodern generations, starting from 1960s, it stopped working. You know, Billy Graham once said, if you keep dripping the water on the board, it will eventually crack. The board will crack. But humans sometimes, they can develop actually reaction out of spite. The opposite. And this is what happens. It was my favorite rock group. Back in my school years, when I went to Kyiv University, I had a good friend. Actually, he was my classmate. We sat at the same desk for 10 years of Soviet school, and his father was my favorite physics teacher. But when both of us enrolled into the physics department of Kyiv State University, my good friend have learned about the rock and heavy metal. Metallica, Tormentor, Slayer, he was listening to all this. Didn't stick too much. But I like the guitar of AC/DC. Kind of a interesting sound. I don't know, my ears liked the guitar and the rhythm. It was nice. My problem is when I was 18, 19, my English was not good enough to understand everything. And I didn't understand 95% of what they were singing. When my English got to the level enough to understand, I understood. And it was interesting for me to listen to that favorite tune, Highway to Hell. Now I understood every word, but I understood even more. I realized what these guys are doing is the mockery. This is not, this is a whole album. They have Highway to Hell, Hell's Bells. This is a mockery. They intentionally make this song to mock their Christian upbringing. Because it is that year, 70th, you know. Brian Johnson, of course, died suffocating on his own vomit, you know. But if you think about all these guys were raised in a nice Christian Anglo-Saxon families, and, you know, like the hippies of the 60s and all this, they just, for whatever reason, and I don't quite understand what was going on in the 60s to raise this movement, but they just decided to throw it all away. And in that tone, in that mode, they were mocking the Christian doctrine of hell and brimstones which they grew up. Another typical example of this is a group, Black Sabbath. I don't have their pictures, but the leader of the group of Black Sabbath was the son of a pastor. And again, what they create with their music, if you listen to all these motifs, especially the rock groups of early period, this is all the motifs of the lyric is all Christian. But it's the mockery of Christianity. It's like, I hate what I grew up with. Hollywood. Do you know this character? It's a Hellboy. Back in, I think in 2002, they came up with this movie. He's actually a nice fellow. What Hollywood did, again, they take a very typical view of hell, where there are demons with the pitchforks, Well, actually, there's nothing new under the sun. Remember the Renaissance. And the literature of Renaissance is Dante. And what's Dante is about the 7 circles of hell. Right? And what is it all about? It's about mockery. It's a satire. The Divine Comedy, it's a satire on the doctrine which has been taught, which was used for so many years as a manipulation of the human conscience. And what is happening with AC/DC, with Black Sabbath, with the Hollywood, this is not a surprise to me. If you treat the child like this, he will rebel. If you keep the pressure cooker under pressure and you close tight all the valves, it will blow up. The pressure has to be released. And what we're seeing, the theme of hell, the theme of divine judgment and punishment presented in a satirical manner in popular culture is that blown pressure cooker. So, it's been for so long. This is an interesting picture. In Russia, close to Norwegian border, there is a Kola Peninsula. It's on the right. It sits right on the Arctic Ocean. That's the navy that's the main base of the Russian Navy. And there at the Kola Peninsula, they decided to drill the deepest shaft in the world. It was 11 kilometers deep, which is, 7 miles? It was 7 miles deep. Their goal was to drill to the earth mantle. That's why they chose Kola Peninsula, because the geophysics analysis showed that the earth crust is one of the thinnest. So they just wanted to drill all the way through the earth crust into the mantle to test what is it made of. You know, the theory it's made of iron. Well, by 1989, Soviet Union was in a very bad shape, and as a result, they ran out of money, and the project stopped. But Russians are very creative people. They couldn't just take, oh, the project stopped because the money ran out. So the articles, this picture I took from the article. And the article describes that the drillers were overcame by fear, because when they reached the 7-mile point in depth, they saw a strange winged creature that appeared out of the shaft and flew out, and it was black and it was scary. And then they began to hear out of this shaft the moanings and groanings and screamings. So this article came out in a reputable newspaper when, and they really claim that these geologists have discovered the entrance to hell. And they were not, it wasn't some kind of a comedy or something. The people who wrote this article were absolutely dead serious. Well, as I say, you see here a typical Russian Orthodox church and a candle lighting. People are really scared of hell. People are really scared that their loved ones would not get to hell. And that's why in Russian Orthodox Church, I don't know Catholic very much, but in Russian Orthodox Church, this candle lighting, you go, you buy a candle, and you light the candle for the peace of the soul. So you say a prayer that the soul would not be in hell. So this is a very typical scene which you would see, a typical belief. Well, yes, let's go to some sources. And I'm going to read some of the theories. And of course, the Catholic Encyclopedia teaches that hell, in Latin infernus, in theological usage is a place of punishment after death. Theologians distinguish 4 meanings of the term hell. Hell is in a strict sense the place of punishment for the damned, be they demons or men. The limbo of infants, where those who die in original sin alone and without personal moral sin are confined and undergo some kind of punishment. The limbo of fathers, in which the souls of the just who died before Christ await their admission to heaven, for in meantime heaven was closed against them in punishment for the sin of Adam. You know why are they talking this way? Catholics are very smart theologians. They read their Bible. They read Daniel 12 when it talks about when Michael comes, There will be those, we read this passage, those who are asleep in the dust will raise, some for the resurrection of life, the other for the resurrection of condemnation. Catholics read their Matthew chapter 25 and the parable about the shepherd dividing sheep and goats, and the explanation when it happens, when Jesus is coming and sending the goats to the everlasting fire and sending the sheep to the kingdom at his coming. They read this. They're not like Catholics are very serious theologians, and they have a very serious scholarly resources. We cannot, there are some people who think they can, outmaneuver and refute all Catholic arguments just using the internet. They're very, they'll be disappointed. I tell you, Catholics have serious theological institutions, and they know what they're talking about. So they know all these verses. So the theory of limbo or purgatory also, see it says, where the just who die in venial sin and who still owe a debt of temporal punishment for sin are cleansed by suffering before their admission to heaven. See? They understand that heaven will come only at the advent of Jesus. But that's why they're very carefully craft the theory of limbo and purgatory, because by this they will harmonize. They harmonize what's in the Gospels and what they want people to believe. Because, of course, the goal is still scare people. See, you got purgatory, and it means those who have in Catholic theology, there is mortal sins and venial sins. So, of course, the mortal sins, that's the other issue, but the venial sins is, everybody has the venial sin. So, a person dies, he was a good Catholic, people kind of, understand he's eventually going to go to heaven, but the family is very worried, meanwhile, he needs to pay his debt, he needs to sit a little bit in a fire, being roasted a little bit, and so nobody wants their deceased loved one to just be roasted indefinitely, and so they order mass, they pay money, so that this roasting in purgatory would not be that prolonged, So it's a very interesting theory. But they're trying to harmonize the Bible here. They're trying. In itself, there is no rejection of Catholic dogma to suppose that God might at times, by way of exception, liberate soul from hell. Thus, some argued that a false interpretation of Peter, 1 Peter 3:19, and so forth, that Christ freed several damned souls on the occasion of his descent into hell. We'll talk about Peter descending to hell. That's a very interesting Jesus descending to hell, as Peter describes. That's a very interesting story in his life. So, but yeah, This is what they believe. Others were misled by untrustworthy stories into belief that the prayers of Gregory the Great rescued the Emperor Trajan from hell. But now theologians are unanimous in teaching that such exceptions never take place and never have taken place, a teaching which should be accepted. If this is true, how can a church pray in the offertory or the Mass for the dead? Libera animas omnium fidelium defunctorum de poenic inferni et de profunda laco. Well, if I understand a little bit of Latin, libera stands for liberate. Anima is not the anima, it's the soul. Okay, liberate the soul of omnium. I think it's faith. It's soul of faithful. No. Fidelium is faithful. Defunctorium is kind of defunct faith. What is omnium? Anyway, from the poenis, it's pains. From the pain of inferno. So you get an idea, right? So many think that church uses these words to designate purgatory. They can be explained more readily, however, if we take into consideration of peculiar spirit of the church liturgy. Sometimes she refers her prayer not to the time which they're said, but to the time for which they're said. Yeah, see, from the horse's mouth, so that we would know. I mean, it's a Catholic, it's a New Catholic encyclopedia. So, as you can see, I say it's dogma, but as you can see, it's not that dogmatic, but there is a storyline here. There is a storyline here. So, that's why we don't need to invent anything. We just take it from the straight from the horse's mouth, right? Thus, the offertory in question is referred to the moment when the soul is about to leave the body. We just talked about this yesterday. Yeah. Although it is actually said sometime after that moment, and if we were actually at the deathbeds of the faithful, the priest implores God to preserve their soul from hell. But whichever explanation be preferred, this much remains certain, that in saying that offertory, the church intends to implore only those graces which the soul is still capable of receiving, namely the grace of happy death in the release from purgatory. Anyway, that's Catholic. That's Catholic theory about the hell. I just put the whole article so that you would know the primary source. Now, let's read a Protestant view. Hell, place of future punishment for the lost. See the difference, future, okay? Unrepented, wicked, dead. Hell is the final destiny of unbelievers and variously described by the figures of furnace of fire, eternal punishment. Right? So, that's a clear Protestant view. And it's more simplified, but here's the definition, which we'll have to work with. Okay? So, as a summary, here are the presuppositions about the fire. By the way, nice pictures I took from a long time ago from the volcano Kilauea. Yep. I don't know if I visited all, Kilauea and Haleakala. Back in 2003, it was more kind of pristine than now. Now it's more, you don't see. But back then, you walk on this lava, and it's like, hey, it's really ashes, like you're walking on a real, what used to be an inferno. I don't know if St. Helens is felt this way. No? See, I haven't had, I live by St. Helens. I didn't go there yet, but I went to Hawaiian volcanoes. Shame on me. Anyway, but that's why this is the picture I took from the helicopter over Kilauea. So it kind of brings back the association. So first presupposition, hell constitutes torments in the fire. The torments of hell begin right after the death. Soul of a sinner is suffering in the fire of hell while the body remains in the grave. So these are major presuppositions. And so this is what I invite you to examine. Because indeed, we have a description of hell in the Bible. It is found in chapter 14 of the book of Isaiah. And here is a description. Hell from beneath is moved for thee, to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. Isaiah 14. You see what's happening? First of all, yes, hell is definitely found beneath. But look, they kind of seems like they're sleeping there. Do you think, I don't know, we had back in the, when we, back in the early 80s, we were introduced to the Indian yogs. And the Indian professional yoga people, they can lay on the nails and they can endure all kinds of pain. So, do you think there is somebody who is so good at yoga that that he or she can lay down in a fire and fall asleep, kind of sound asleep, in some kind of blast furnace? Just crawl into the blast furnace. I'm too cold. I'm gonna warm up a little bit. So crawl into the blast furnace and fall asleep. Yeah. So all they speak and say unto thee, aren't thou become weak like we? Aren't thou become into us? Well, let me talk to you a little bit here. First of all, we talked about two distinct patterns in religions and how they see different things differently. The same things differently. You got Egypt, and I showed you the slide from the Book of the Dead, where Osiris, who has a head like a dog, will swallow the soul which is being judged. So we talked enough to discover that the idea of the soul that is departing from the body at the moment of death is clearly Egyptian. But when you go Babylon, in a way it's the opposite. Babylonians did not believe in that kind of judgment. although they believed in familiar spirits, and that's why many of their relatives are buried right underneath their houses, because they want the spirit of dead relatives to stay in the house. But generally, if you look at the mythology of Babylon, you will discover that they believe in quote-unquote netherworld, where everybody after death goes to sleep. So the idea of kings and thrones and nations, it definitely has some connection with the Near Eastern thinking, not the Egyptian, not the Greek thinking. There is, for example, a story, myth about the descent of Ishtar. Ishtar is the famous goddess in Babylonian pantheon. The descent of Ishtar into the netherworld. So this myth talks about how Ishtar decided to go visit her cousin, who is the goddess of netherworld. And she knocks on the gate very hard. And her cousin is kind of like a sleepy hollow. What do you want? Why are you disturbing us? So this is the difference between what the Babylonians believe of what happened to people after death compared to what Egyptians believe. But this is all mythology and imagery, nice, but the Bible is very clear. Let's keep reading. Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. You see?
They're not burning.
No. Folks, this text is very clear. This is chapter 14 of Isaiah, 9, 10, 11. And in fact, what the King James does here, they have to acknowledge they cannot translate this word grave here as hell, but it is the same word. Here, and here is the same word. In Hebrew. The word is Sheol. And Sheol, which King James translates here as hell, they don't want to translate this as hell because they do not believe in the worms of Sheol. They believe that in the hellfire. But Isaiah definitely describes hell as a grave. That is very consistent. In fact, you can study the word Sheol in the Hebrew Bible. It occurs 65 times. And it is connected strictly and clearly with the grave. There is, of course, a famous text which is brought up very often, which seems to, this is the only text which you actually can find about the soul in hell. Again, I'm going King James to be consistent here. For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell. Yeah. It is interesting in New American Standard, which is down below, for you shall not abandon my soul in Sheol. And as you see the footnote 1 will tell you that they would translate it or hell. So yeah, the soul in hell. Wow, that's the proof. But let's look at how Peter interprets this text, because it is interesting that on a day of Pentecost, after this manifestation of the Holy Spirit, when, many people are amazed, how come they all come from different areas of diaspora, but they have, they hear these disciples speak in their languages. So Peter gives them a speech. And in the Peter's speech, here's the piece I want to cite for you from New American Standard. Men of Israel, listen to those words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man delivered over by the predicament, plan, and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in power. Now here's the quotation. For David says of him, I saw the Lord always in my presence, for he is at my right hand, so that I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue exulted. Moreover, my flesh also will live in hope, because you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or to hell. See, they go back and forth. I'll have to do a little Greek and Hebrew for you again. Nor allow the Holy One to undergo decay. You have made known to me the ways of life, and you make me full of gladness in your presence. What is he talking about? Whose soul was in hell?
That would have been Jesus.
That was the Jesus. I mean, if Psalm 16:10 speaks about the possibility of soul in hell, it means that Jesus' soul was in hell. We studied yesterday what happened to Jesus' soul. He gave it for us by spilling his blood. So what's the problem here? The problem here in this text is that you have a poetic parallelism, as we spoke. You have one line speaking, the other line, they speak the same thing, different words. First line is here, you will not abandon my soul in Hades. And here, nor allow the Holy One to undergo decay. In the context of Jesus, where is the Hades or hell? This was the place to which Joseph of Arimathea allowed to be put. It was the family grave. Those of you who went with me to Jerusalem saw the possible location of this grave and how it looked. That's what the hell is. That's what the Hades is. And the words, you will not abandon my soul in Hades, is the same as allowing the Holy One to be decayed. Guess what? What is going to happen to the body left in the grave?
Decay.
Yeah. So if we apply the definition of soul here as blood, It's very clear. When the blood doesn't move because the heart doesn't beat, what happens to this blood? That begins to decay first, right? Then, of course, if Jesus was raised up, it didn't happen to him. So, we also have a hope that eventually our soul will not be left in hell. And even though we may with Jesus, his body did not undergo decay. The bodies of some who will be raised from the dead will undergo decay. But they will be restored. But Jesus' body did not undergo decay. That's what it's talking about. And here is Jesus' the explanation. Brethren, I may confidentially say to you regarding the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us today, to this day. See, it's very clear how Peter interprets this psalm. He speaks, because this is the psalm of David, Peter says, David could not have spoken this about himself, because he's dead, and we know he's dead, right? So, because he was a prophet, he knew that God had sworn to him an oath to seat one of his descendants on his throne. He looked ahead and spoke of resurrection of the Christ, that he was neither abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh suffer decay. See? By the way, this is the only text in the whole Bible that actually, Psalm 16:10, that predicts specifically the resurrection. So for a Christian to use this text as a proof text that the soul of sinner after death goes straight to hell, it means they will cut off the branch on which they sit. Because this is the only, if this text about the hell, not about the resurrection of Messiah, then there is no other prophecy about the resurrection of Messiah anywhere else in the Old Testament. Speaking the Christian language here, but that is an absolute fact, backed up by the book of Acts. So, what's going on then with Jesus? Okay, on the one hand, we say he was not left in hell, but Peter speaks about him going to hell, preaching to some spirits. What about the rich man and Lazarus? All of these about after the short break.